What's up, John? How are you, man?
Doing well. How are
Man,
you?
it's great, great, great. Man, just for the people who are watching, man, can you introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about how you came to faith in Christ Jesus?
Okay. My names are John Oihoma Eigege, and I'm originally from Nigeria. And I lived in Nigeria in a city called Jos. And if you know anything about Jos, Jos sits on a fault line between a predominantly Muslim northern Nigeria and a predominantly Christian southern Nigeria. So that's kind of the context that I grew up in. I grew up around a lot of religion.
Wow.
So lots of Christians in my city, lots of Muslims in our city as well. And for the most part, when I was growing up, living side by side, we had Muslim neighbors and Christian neighbors and people from, Muslims both from Nigeria and Muslims from outside of Nigeria as well. So that was the context that shaped faith for me growing up. It was very, very much about religion. How faithful are you to the God that you serve?
Wow.
What do you do on a regular basis to show that faithfulness to that God that you serve? But also there was a lot in there about like conformity to whatever culture it was that you were in. So whether you were in a Muslim culture, just seeing how do you conform to that culture and to those certain beliefs. But if you were a Christian as well, how do you conform to like moral standards within a Christian community as well? But in the year 2001, kind of right around the time that September 11 was happening, there was a huge religious riot in Jos. Yeah.
Wow.
So huge religious riot. A lot of the peace that we had seen with Muslims and Christians coexisting together kind of started to erode. And part of that was political as well. Usually in Nigeria, of course, the ethnic, religious, and political lines a lot of times blur. But just the city that we had known as a place of peace kind of started to become this place of violence where Christians were killing Muslims, people from one political party were killing people from another political party, people from one ethnic tribe were killing people from another ethnic people group. And in that kind of environment, I think I started to ask a lot of questions about what I believed because of what I saw. I saw the religious way that I believed in Christ kind of starting to become sort of this powder keg, this thing that was exploding. It was just all about religion, all about what I believed, and everybody who wasn't a part of my tribe and a part of my group and a part of my religion was kind of cut off from any sort of acts of grace or faithfulness or love or kindness. And seeing that happen in our city, I think really started to push me to look for something more to my faith, that my faith can't just be this thing that defines my tribe. My faith actually has to be something that pushes me to a place of love, to a place of forgiveness. My faith has to be something that really and captures how I treat people who are not a part of my tribe. It's not just about what I believe and what I do to conform to the people who are kind of within my tribe. And I think that was the beginning of the journey of faith for me, like true, genuine faith in Jesus Christ, to start thinking more about, okay, what does God's love and God's grace say to me as an Idoma, Nigerian Christian? How does that push me to love people who are not from my tribe and not from my religion? How does that push me to show grace and love to them? And also just kind of bringing me to a point where I started to see God's grace as something bigger. Started to see it as something that gave my life purpose beyond sort of the day-to-day, especially living in that environment where there was violence and you didn't know if you were going to live the next day or die. There were certain neighborhoods that you avoided because of the violence that was in those neighborhoods, or because you were a Christian and you didn't want to pass through that neighborhood because it was a Muslim neighborhood. But I think learning about Christ in that way started to push me to ask more questions about how does faith in Christ help me as a Christian living in Jos to actually embody my faith in Christ and make it real.
Yeah.
And that really started the journey of faith and the journey of coming to Christ for me.
Yeah.
A journey that a lot of times I tell people I'm still
Right.
on today,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
even though it's a different context, me living and working in the third ward.
Yeah.
But that really started that journey of genuine faith and trust in Jesus Christ for me.
So you would describe it as you're coming to Christ, not necessarily as an event, but as a journey.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, and it's funny that you say that, because I think as Americans, everything is, you know, we like events.
Yeah.
Journeys, not so much, unless it's vacations.
Yeah.
Right? So, man, that's good. So tell me, how did you know, what brought you from Jos, which from my understanding, I've been to the northern part of Nigeria. Jos is a heavy missionary place.
Yeah.
A lot of when the missionaries came, you know, it's got that climate. It's the
Climate,
only
no
place,
cool weather.
yeah, that cool weather that Americans love. So,
Yeah.
man, what brought you to America? And I know that you started out at Calvin College. So, what brought you there, and then what brought you here to Third Ward, Houston, Texas?
The connection to Calvin really was because, again, as you said, Jos, hotbed for missions, you know, so there's many other Nigerian cities like Lagos, that's a center of commerce. And so most of the people from outside of Nigeria that you would see in Lagos are people who are business people, or Abuja, which is kind of like your capital city. Most of the people that are expats in Abuja are people who are coming to work for embassies or consulates. But in Jos was very different. It was just this hotbed for missionaries. Like a lot of missions agencies started their work in Nigeria from Jos and then moved out to other parts of Nigeria. And so the connection with Calvin College I had was through the Christian Reformed Church that had a big presence in Nigeria. There was one of their missionaries, her name was Johanna Veenstra, and she was a pioneer for the denomination because she actually chose to go to Nigeria even when the denomination said they were not going to go to Nigeria. So this was in the early 20th century. So she was kind of a renegade, you know, this single young white woman who decided against the wishes of her denomination to go to Nigeria and to do ministry and mission work in Nigeria. And so through her work, a lot of the missions that the Christian Reformed Church does started to get notoriety. People started to know what the church did. The Christian Reformed Church in Nigeria currently today is actually bigger than the Christian Reformed Church in both the US and Canada combined. You know, so just kind of seeing that work that the church did, they were very, very focused on doing works not just of spreading the gospel through word, but also spreading it through deed. So their denomination had missions agencies that also did relief work, community development work. And I saw a lot of that happening, and just grew my respect for that denomination. But I heard about this school that they had called Calvin College. And of course, growing up in Nigeria under a military dictatorship, most of the schools and universities in Nigeria were government run, and we were looking for schools to go to after we finished high school. And my parents just told me and my brothers, you guys find schools in the US. It doesn't matter how long or how expensive those schools are going to be, as long as we know we're sending you to a school and sending you to a place where you're going in and in 4 years you're going to get a degree if you apply yourself. You know, we'll do that for you. So that's really how I heard about Calvin College, through the work of the Christian Reformed Church, and my parents kind of urging us to look for schools that were outside of Nigeria where we could go and get our education.
So you could have finished and went home. What pushed you to say, man, I'm coming to Houston, Texas?
Really just God's calling, because at the time I finished from Calvin College and did a major kind of an interdisciplinary studies, looking to pattern it around construction management degrees that were at other schools, because that's where I really wanted to focus a lot of my education and a lot of my work. That's where I felt like God was calling me to sort of bless Nigeria when I went back. You know, seeing mismanagement of construction projects. That's where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
But it really was a lot of shut doors. Like God seemed to be closing a lot of doors. I was applying for jobs in different places and not really finding anything.
Wow.
But before then, I had been very, very involved. Again, just with the whole idea of religious conformity and wanting to do things just because of religion versus doing them because I truly had a deep and vibrant and dynamic faith in Christ. Halfway through college, many people started to give me opportunities to explore what it means to have a dynamic faith in Christ. So I was helping lead chapels, helping lead worship. Many mentors were stepping into my life and showing me exactly what it means to follow Christ beyond just the religion, you know, beyond saying, okay, this is what my parents did, and so it's what I'm going to do as well. And in that process, many of the folks who were mentoring me started to push me and say, you should consider a theological education as well. We're seeing a lot of growth in your faith, but we feel like if you got a theological education, it will actually help you grow even more, but will give you the language that you need to be able to talk about what God's doing in your life and spread that to other people. And of course, for me, I was like, nah, that's not where God's calling me. God's calling me to build stuff, like physical things in Nigeria. But again, these shut doors that God seemed to be placing in front of me where I was trying to go construction management route, I was applying for jobs, I was traveling many places and interviewing, but none of the interviews seemed to pan out. And finally, you know, there was a day where God just had me in the seminary. You know, I was walking home because I was doing my job searches at the library at Calvin College, and the seminary was right by the library. So walking home, I ended up in the seminary, and I just said, you know what, I'm here for a while. It was raining. I wasn't going home anytime soon. So I said, let me just walk the halls and actually ask some questions. People have told me you should consider a seminary education. Let me just ask somebody who's doing admissions here, like, what is this place about? And I sat down and I talked with the admissions counselor, and he just told me about seminary, an opportunity for me to grow in my faith and my understanding of the church and God's mission in this world. And at the time, I really thought, okay, I wouldn't do anything full-time with it. I would just get the necessary pieces I needed for a part-time education where I could still have the construction management job and do ministry kind of on the side. But the more I talked with them at the seminary, the more I started to see that this was probably the place or that God wanted me to be long-term and full-time as well. Vocational ministry, experiencing that. And I remember when I told my parents, my dad specifically, you know, of course, the joke with African parents, you're either a doctor, a lawyer, a business person, or you're a failure. You know? So having that conversation with my dad, and my dad is a very, very spiritual person. Like, he's one of the people whose faith I really respect because my dad doesn't compartmentalize his faith. Like, his faith and his job like, it affects everything that he does. How he parents his children, how he does stuff at church, how he conducts himself at work. And when I told him, this was very new to him as well, because I had never spoken with anybody in my family about pursuing vocational ministry. And so he asked a lot of tough questions. You know, him and my big brother asked a lot of tough questions to make sure that this was something that God was really calling me to do, and just to help me with my discernment process, you know, to make sure that I wasn't just doing this because I was frustrated with all the shut doors that God was putting in my path. And finally, you know, they gave me their blessing. I was able to go to seminary and complete an MDiv degree. But while I was at seminary, I just got a random call from a church in Houston, New Life Christian Reformed Church in Spring, Texas.
Wow.
And the pastor had, his dad was the international student advisor at the school. He had been in another training with somebody that I knew from Nigeria. And then one of my classmates was also a person who had worked with him randomly in New Jersey. But there were these three people who, when he was talking about ministry in Houston, had just given him my name randomly. And so he called me. I've never met him, have never been to Houston, but he pitched an idea of a couple initiatives that their church was looking to start in the Houston area. One of them was just exploring the possibility of planting a Nigerian immigrant church on the southwest side of the city. And so I entered into a period of 4 months of discernment with him. We prayed together. We talked about the possibilities of me coming down. Talked with my then fiance, who's my wife now, about it. And at the end of the 4 months, we felt like there was just something about Houston. God was saying to us, move to Houston.
Yeah.
We didn't know exactly what we would be doing in Houston. We didn't know where we'd be living in Houston. In fact, my wife and I were driving down to Houston while we were looking for an apartment. We were on the phone looking for an apartment. But that sense of calling to a place was very, very strong. This sense that God was at work in Houston through the people and through the church here, and that God was doing something really amazing in this big and diverse city in Texas, and we wanted to be a part of that, even though we had absolutely no clue what that was going to be. So that's really the story.
Yeah. So you moved to Houston, and the kind of work that you're doing right now, in Third Ward, is what?
So right now I work in the Third Ward as a community chaplain.
Okay, and break that down for us.
And I'm still figuring out exactly what that is.
Okay.
But the basic idea is that I'm not a person who works with one specific church or agency, but that I work kind of as a connector, someone who equips and connects and networks and engages with what's already there. So the big idea for the community chaplain role really was an idea that said, why don't we look at what's already in the Third Ward, and instead of starting something similar, how can we come alongside the work that God's already doing in the Third Ward? Because initially I had been called down to plant a church, but started to see that there are a lot of churches in the Third Ward, a lot of great church plants like yours that were doing good work in the Third Ward. And we started to ask that question with our denomination, is there room for us to position ourselves in a different way instead of being in competition with what God's already doing in this neighborhood? How can we come in and catalyze and enhance and just kind of add value to the work that God's already doing? So this idea of a community chaplain, somebody who comes in and just encourages those who are already doing the work in the Third Ward, somebody who comes in and prays, organizes prayer gatherings for people in the Third Ward, somebody who comes in and develops relationships with the folks who are already doing the work of God in the Third Ward, and instead of taking care of a lot of stuff outside, just says, I want to take care of this group of mission-minded people that God has called to this neighborhood.
So I was going to tell you, I want to say thank you for being my chaplain, and man, it is. I look forward to those meetings. I mean, God's done some amazing things in my heart, in my life, in the life of the church. Some they don't know. Some, our church doesn't know how much they benefit from just the work you've done in the community. So, man, just thank you, man. What do you see if somebody desired to work in their neighborhood? And you'll be talking about urban renewal with a panel of people who are from the trade, and so most of you will already have known. But there'll be somebody in that audience that says, "Man, I want to do some work in my neighborhood." What would you say to that person? They're just wide-eyed and, man, I just want to do some work in the neighborhood. I mean, what would be your response to them?
I think a good place to start is just this idea that that God's already in your neighborhood.
Okay.
There's a lot of times we look at neighborhoods, especially like this, and kind of think like we're the people who are kind of bringing Jesus to the neighborhood. The thing that God's been teaching me most living and working in the Third Ward is that He's already here. And He's already going ahead of me. And I should kind of dispel any thought that I'm the one who's bringing God to the neighborhood or bringing Him to the residents that I work with or the communities that I'm working with. Just that idea that God is already here. And if God is already here, my job is to position myself alongside the missional work that God's already doing, because He's the one who is the ultimate sent one. He's the one who initiates every sort of missional activity in our neighborhood. So I think I would say to that person, like, open your eyes and look for the places where Jesus is already working.
Wow.
And then just put yourself there, because that's where you'll be most effective.
Yeah.
That's where your life and your work will have more purpose, is when you align yourself with the things that God's already doing in your neighborhood.
Wow, man, this is amazing. I'm looking forward to what's going to happen on, I think that luncheon is May the 28th, 2016, City of Refuge, Hope for the Tray. Man, thank you for sharing. I know so many people will be blessed by just your story and your story of discovery. So, man, God bless you, man.
God bless you too.
All right, man.
Thank you.